Hi, let's talk about innovations and ideas today. If we think of innovations, things like cars, planes, trains and rockets might come to mind. Radio, television and internet made huge impacts onto our society, causing big shifts in many aspects of life like medicine, economy, transport and communication. But if we zoom out a bit, there were other times of big change too. Things like the printing press, the wheel, or money for example. And if we go back further and further in time, we find ourselves looking for the first invention. The first idea, if you will, and I will. The more I looked into this, the more I was wondering if there even was something like that, and there indeed is. We go from rockets to rocks. Or rather, exquisite tools, as our ancestors would have called them.
Caveman approves.
Hitting things with rocks really was our first game changer. It opened up ways to manipulate our surroundings to a much higher degree than before. Cracking bones without damaging your teeth? Rocks. Digging without dirty nails? Rocks. Cutting things like fruits and hides? You guessed it, rocks. Thank you. After we had fun with rocks for about 1 million years, we figured there might be some even better rocks elsewhere, so we left our home to come back in a couple million years and bring civilization to the continent. Anyway, we found cool rocks elsewhere, and some of our smarter ancestors discovered that fire wasn't evil or bad, but instead useful. Again, we were able to manipulate our environment much further, now able to change the structure and temperature. On a side note, when cooking first started to become a thing, it must have been a culinary explosion. And if you followed humans for the last however many years, you know what comes next. Weapons. Of course, what else? However, those mostly consisted of sharp rocks on sticks and were primarily used for hunting. This was 500,000 years ago, and it took some time for us to come up with something clever after that. For fuck's sake, who wrote this script? How was a non-native supposed to say that? What do you mean it's a transition to the next idea? So, what follows was probably either language or clothing, but we can't say that for certain because estimates for clothing reach from 170,000 years ago to 80,000 years ago, and there are no fossils for spoken language, just hints like changes in skull and vocal tract anatomy. I think it makes for a much nicer story though to imagine they invented language and then asked each other why they were naked, but data is unclear on that. Both of them were big breakthroughs. One physical and one psychological. Not freezing to death was quite a boost, but language is the real powerhouse if it comes to ideas. It allowed us to cooperate on a much larger scale and help making plans in general. It's the foundation for all future inventions in a way. Together with tools and fire, we got the key ingredients for the rise of our civilization. So what did we do next? After we were done with those
Bare necessities.
we made cosmetics. No, not that type. Not that one either, more like this. We have some solid indications for beads worn as necklace and possibly in hair from 150,000 years ago. Over the next 50,000 years, we also added some makeup. Around the same time, 100,000 years ago, we started with burial rituals. At least the oldest evidence points towards that time. Needless to say, but I will do it anyway, these things never were a flipped switch, but spread over thousands of years across the entire globe. We have now moved from 3 million years ago to just 100,000 years ago, and if you haven't noticed the trend yet, time spans between changes keep reducing. So let's zoom in a bit for the second part of this video. And the next thing we came up with was boats. Not that we found any from that time, because wood doesn't exactly age well. But we can cleverly deduce that boats were used up to 65,000 years ago to do some island hopping and cross at least one large gap of around 100 kilometers to get to Australia. This happens around the same time as we invent something else. Art. Cave paintings, to be exact. The new oldest one was recently discovered in Indonesia. I'm talking, of course, about this masterpiece. And art evolved fast. A mere 15,000 years later, we already set the foundation for an entire industry with cave comics that included different scenes and characters and their relationships to one another. I gotta say though, to me this looks like a skeleton archer on a spider hunting a chicken. What do you see? Let me know in the comment section. It may or may not come as a surprise to you that we also started storing information shortly after, but it's impossible to say whether it was calendars, counting, or just remember to empty the trash. This was closely followed by the first Phallus carving. Yes, that's been a thing for quite a while, have fun with that fact.
What can I say except you're welcome?
And while we are at fun facts, the needle was up next, way before haystacks actually became a thing. Around that time we also achieved one of the biggest cultural breakthroughs. Not because of its impact on the environment, but on each other. Music! We created the first basic instruments, flutes to be exact. Well, there might have been drums before, but they are a nightmare to prove. It's a classic case of absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The impact, however, of music to create a common vibe can't be underestimated in a time where you had to stick together to survive. And that's especially true for what's next in store for humanity.
Ice Age!
We reached the last glacial maximum roughly 25 to 20,000 years ago, covering large parts of North America and Eurasia in ice. This new environmental pressure forced humans to develop new gears and techniques to survive. Those consisted of fishing hooks, pottery, super useful by the way, and, while the ice started to melt, the first ally joining our party. The wolf.
Which means man and wolf, werewolf, man, wolf.
Humans managed to turn their enemies into friends, which is one of the most incredible abilities we have. When we started sharing our meat with our newfound friends, we also began looking into other, more advanced types of food. For example, bread, which was first made, to our knowledge, 14,000 years ago in Jordan. That actually means that bread came first and agriculture second, which I personally found somewhat fascinating. Speaking of agriculture, over the entire course of this 3 million year journey, we have been nomads, hunters and gatherers. But around 12,000 years ago, one of the biggest changes in our civilizational history took place. We stayed. Instead of wandering around, we started permanently improving our life in one area and were able to sustain and increase our population. It marks the end of an era and this video. But fortunately, there are way more eras to come and history is just about to pick up speed. So stay tuned for the next episode of
History of Ideas,
where we will have a look at the first cities, monies, laws and wheels. See you there!